Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to this explainer, where today we're turning our focus toward a fascinating and honestly incredibly common behavioral trait. We're going to decode the hidden psychology behind why some people simply never ask for help. It's a topic that touches almost all of us, either because we know someone exactly like this, or let's be real, because we are that person. You know the type, right? The person who will stubbornly carry all 12 heavy grocery bags from the car, literally cutting off the circulation to their fingers until they turn purple, rather than just, asking for a hand. Well, we're going to unpack the architecture of what's really going on beneath the surface of that behavior. So, think about your own life for a sec. Have you ever noticed that one person in your circle, or hey, maybe it's the person staring back at you in the mirror, who never complains, the person who always refuses a hand, even when they are clearly drowning in obligations? I mean, you know what it looks like. Their inbox is sitting at 10,000 unread emails, they're working right through lunch, but when you gently ask if they need a hand, they just flash that tight little smile and say, "Nope, I've got it." To the outside world, it looks like they just have everything together. It looks like this extreme form of strength or incredible discipline. But let's look a little closer at what psychology actually tells us is happening here. And this brilliantly illustrates a core misconception we're tackling today. Society constantly tells us that never needing anyone is a sign of ultimate power and capability. We absolutely celebrate the lone wolf. But the psychological reality, it is much, much different. It's actually a deeply ingrained survival mechanism. When you really dig into the psychology of it, never asking for help isn't about being invincible, and it's definitely not about having boundless energy. It's a coping strategy, one that was learned when support just wasn't guaranteed in your past, and your brain basically decided it was just safer to go it alone. In clinical terms, we actually call this hyper-independence. It's a psychological survival mechanism where extreme self-reliance is used as a way to avoid the vulnerability of relying on other people. To truly understand this, we have to look at the architecture of the behavior itself. There are 5 core drivers behind this silent struggle, and almost all of them take root in the exact same place: childhood. We're going to break down exactly why the people who seem the absolute most capable are very often the ones silently struggling the most. Hyper-independence is often a silent cry for help. Wow. I want you to just let that sink in for a moment. For all the strong friends tuning in right now, this is a heavy realization. Your silence might be hiding a very different story on the inside. It's not about asserting power, it's about protection. That silence isn't a sign that everything is completely fine. It's often a sign that you just don't know how to articulate your overwhelming stress without feeling like an absolute burden to the people around you. So, let's get into the first reason. This usually kicks off with what psychology calls the easy child adaptation. Imagine growing up in an environment where there was high stress, tension, or maybe emotional distance. Kids are incredibly perceptive, right? In those high-stress homes, a child quickly learns that becoming low maintenance, being the good kid who never needs anything, is the absolute best way to stay safe, stay loved, and keep the peace. You figure out very early on that you absolutely do not want to add any extra pressure to your parents' already overflowing plates. But here's the really tricky part. As you grow into an adult, this pattern doesn't just magically vanish. It becomes completely automatic. You stop asking for help because deep down, you've tied your actual worth to how little trouble you cause for others. You aren't being strong when you refuse assistance. You are just repeating an old script from your childhood where having needs fundamentally felt like a burden. It's a deeply ingrained habit telling you that if you need something, you are somehow doing life wrong. Now, what's really interesting about this next dynamic is what happens if the environment wasn't just stressful, but entirely unpredictable. That brings us to reason number 2, the scapegoat dynamic. If you grew up in a family where support was wildly inconsistent, your brain learned a painful, enduring lesson. It learned that help is never, ever guaranteed. When the people who were supposed to protect you just weren't there when you needed the most, you were essentially forced into complete and utter self-reliance for comfort, for safety, and for making decisions. So today, asking for support feels highly unnatural or even weak to you, but it's so vital to recognize that your mind is simply trying to protect you. It remembers the sting of the past and is guarding you against the possibility of being let down again. Your nervous system literally treats vulnerability like a hand on a hot stove. It's a blaring alarm bell warning you of danger. Making yourself vulnerable doesn't feel healing or connective. To your deeply conditioned brain, the very act of vulnerability feels like a massive threat. And this past conditioning often bleeds into a secret, lingering dread in adulthood, which brings us to our third reason. Do you secretly fear being replaceable in your relationships or your job? This is a massive present-day symptom where people feel their place in life is entirely conditional. If you harbor this secret dread that people would easily move on if you disappeared, or if you stop being useful, it completely changes how you interact with the world around you. It basically turns every relationship into a performance. Let's move to how this actually plays out and see how this builds into an exhausting defensive cycle. First, you start preparing for endings before they even happen, always keeping one foot out the door. Second, you smile and say it's fine when it absolutely isn't. And third, you overgive to make yourself feel indispensable, taking on 3 extra projects at work just to prove your worth. You hide your needs because you don't want to risk being seen as a hassle or too much, terrified that the very moment you become a challenge, you'll be quickly replaced. And, well, if you live in that cycle long enough, you're going to hit reason number 4, emotional burnout. This is the profound mental exhaustion that comes from carrying the weight of other people's worlds on your shoulders, all while feeling like you aren't allowed to have a breaking point of your own. The hyper-independent person often becomes the structural emotional support system for literally everyone else but themselves, completely depleting their own reserves while pretending they have endless energy to give. You essentially become the strong friend. You are the one listening to everyone's problems, offering the very best advice, and acting as the foundational pillar for your circle. But you never ever show a crack in your own armor. It's an immense amount of pressure. You're tolerating so much, giving so much energy and time, but without a safety net of your own to catch you when the weight finally gets too heavy to bear. Fear is giving far too much, and the total isolation of your hyper-independence suddenly becomes impossible to ignore anymore. So the crucial point is understanding why we allow ourselves to get this isolated in the first place, which brings us to the 5th and deepest root of all: betrayal sensitivity. This is a hyper-alertness to possible harm caused by past deep hurt, usually from a highly trusted person. If explaining your feelings in the past only led you to being ignored, dismissed, or actively hurt, you learn to use silence as your ultimate interpersonal shield. You build walls so high that no one can ever get close enough to disappoint you again. Distance feels like the only way to stay safe. When your brain has been trained by betrayal, struggling in secret feels infinitely safer than risking the vulnerability of opening up. You'd rather handle the crushing weight of your problems completely alone than risk handing someone the power to dismiss or hurt you again. This protective instinct is so incredibly strong that you might even find yourself actively pushing people away right when they get close enough to actually help you. Okay, but here is the good news. Awareness always comes before change. If you recognize your own reflection in these patterns today, I want you to know that it doesn't mean you're broken. Not at all. Recognizing these patterns simply means your mind has worked incredibly hard to protect you over the years. You've been utilizing a brilliant, albeit exhausting, survival strategy to navigate a world that just didn't always feel safe. Healthy growth isn't about causing 0 problems. It's about feeling safe enough to share them. This is the ultimate takeaway I really want you to hold on to today. True strength is not found in silent suffering or isolation. True strength is actually found in the courage it takes to let others help carry the heavy load. And remember, letting go of hyperindependence is kind of like building a new muscle. It takes time, it takes patience, and it takes practice to learn how to let people in. So I'm going to leave you with this question. Once you understand the why behind your habits, how will you start building the real, supported life you've always wanted? You have the tools now to see the architecture of this behavior and the power to start shifting it. If you want to keep decoding the hidden psychology behind human behavior with us, make sure to subscribe and join us for our next explainer. Keep decoding the mind, and we'll see you next time.